Hi guys, we're about to start the final chapter of Race the Wild Rainforest Relay. I believe it's chapter number 9. It is. It's chapter 9. Right. Creature feature, piranha. Scientific name, multiple species. Family, Carassidae. Type, fish. Range, South American streams and rivers. Food, mostly fish, snails, and insects, but also plants and seeds, or sometimes birds and mammals. There are many species of piranhas, but they all have one thing in common. Their sharp triangular teeth with its powerful jaw. The piranha can chomp a mouthful of meat with ease. The fish usually hunt alone. Group attacks are more likely in dry season when water levels and food options are low. Despite their reputation, deadly piranhas' attack on humans are very, very rare. Chapter 9, Race to the Finish. Dev had to practically pull Mary off the vine, but she made it across in one piece. Sage was next, and Russell wasn't surprised when she landed on the other bank with a graceful release, just as she whipped the vine back his way. He heard the puttering of a motor nearby. Then the motor stopped. "It's another team," he yelled. "They just docked. You guys have to move. I'll catch up." He was surprised when they didn't need convincing. The rest of his team took off on a narrow path through the ferns and palms. The raindrops had increased to jungle size. Russell had never been this wet with his clothes on. He wiped his eyes and looked at the gully ahead. Russell had given everyone else a push. Now he had to get himself across. He needed a running start. He stepped back and then took off. His feet thudded against the ground and his upper arms tensed as he pulled himself onto the vine, his blistered hands throbbing. There wasn't time to feel the wind in his hair. The vine was swinging back before he knew it. Russell let go and skidded down on the far side of the gully, dropping closer and closer to the piranha pool. His fingers grasped a loose root, then another, and he scrambled up to high ground. He lay on his back for a moment, savoring the taste of dirt in his mouth. He wasn't just wet now, he was caked in mud. Ew. It took the calls of unfamiliar voices to remind him that he wasn't on a football field. Nope. He was on the first leg of the wildlife, just steps from the day's final clue. He crawled from his knees to his feet, picking up pace as he passed the first flag on the far side of the gully. The piranhas hadn't gotten a piece of him, and he wasn't going to let the other racers either. He had to meet up with his team. He could still taste the dirt as he ran up a steep flight of stone stairs. When he reached the top, he realized he was standing on an overhang that looked out on a waterfall. There was a wooden railing only feet from the gushing water. At first, Russell just wanted to marvel at the sight, but Bull Gordon stood right in front of the waterfall. Off to his right was the green team. The other members of the red team were off to his left. "Russell," Bull announced, "welcome. Now that the entire red team is here, I can announce that you are the second to arrive." Russell felt his teeth grit with a smile, but his teammates were serious. Bull continued, "The green team was first, but they have failed to answer the final clue. I will now give it to you. We'll see if your team can answer it." As soon as Bull Gordon handed Russell the envelope, his 3 teammates huddled close. With trembling fingers, he ripped it open. "Hurry!" "Hurry, hurry!" Sage chanted nervously. At the top of the card was the same logo that had been on the flags. Directly below was the clue. Straight toward the heavens, an umbrella of green, almost an entire ecosystem, alive in one tree. Russell blinked and thought about the last 2 lines. An ecosystem meant that it was a community of living things that all work together. A healthy ecosystem is balanced. Mary looked at him, hopeful. "You know it, don't you?" "Yeah," Russell said, "I think I do." He told his teammates what he remembered. He remembered the tree they saw in the leafy canopy with the bromeliad. That was a frog nursery. It grew hundreds of feet tall and held eagle nests in its top branches. It was also the kind of tree where he and Mary had hid, among the thousands of insects when the green team had followed them. The 4 kids approached Bull Gordon together. Russell looked at each teammate in turn. They all nodded. "Is it the kapok tree?" he asked, his voice lifting on the last word. Bull Gordon raised his scarred chin. "Indeed it is," he said. "Team Red, you are the first to complete this leg of the race. You will have a head start on the next leg." Russell felt chills start on his shoulders and branch out in every direction. The red team... Hang on, gotta turn the page. The red team didn't yelp or cheer, but they all exchanged hugs. They had done it. "It's not fair," Jaden said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The answer was kind of... tree, not an animal. This is supposed to be about wildlife. The red team paused their small celebration. Everyone looked to the host. "I tend to think an animal's habitat is very important," Bull Gordon said to the entire group, his thumbs punching through his belt loops. "The kapok tree provides food and homes for countless rainforest creatures. It is a perfect example of how organisms in the ecosystem are connected and rely on each other." Russell let out a sigh and noticed Sage studying him. Here's a picture. Must be Bull Gordon with them. "I figured it out," she said. "What?" Russell said. "What I asked you earlier, what you have to offer." Russell thought back to the day before. It seemed so long ago. "You know what it means to be on a team," Sage said, "and that's all we could ask for." "Thanks." "Thanks to you," Russell replied, laughing it off, but he meant it. It mattered. One by one, the members of the green team came up to congratulate him. "At least one of us came in first," Damien said with a friendly high five. "We're all in this together after all, man." Russell gave an uncertain nod. When Dallas approached, he wore his typical post-game grin. He patted Russell on the shoulder. "Glad your team is solid," he said. "Maybe we can work together on the next leg." "Maybe," replied Russell, but he didn't look his old friend in the eye. Dallas had cheated, and Russell didn't know what to do about it. It wasn't right. They shouldn't get away with it. But Russell didn't want the green team to be kicked out of the race either. He'd been friends with them for a long time. He didn't want the race to change that. Instead, his gaze turned to Mary, Dev, and Sage. His new team. His new friends. He hoped that if they ever found out what he knew, they wouldn't be too disappointed in him. He could hear the yells of another group approaching. Who knew? Maybe that team would be their real competition on the next leg. Together, the red team had survived and succeeded in the rainforest, and Russell was already looking forward to what would come next. Want to know what happens when the wildlife moves to the Great Barrier Reef? Read on for a glimpse of the next race course in Race the Wild Great Reef Games. Aw, man. Worst ending ever. We may have to find the next book, guys. Just then, a motorboat appeared from behind the nearby island. Javier waved it down. "Get ready for your first challenge," he announced. He held out a canvas box and raised the lid. Inside was what looked like a smartphone with a short antenna. "The Ancam," Dev declared, plunging his hand into the box. "You sound so excited," Russell said in a mocking tone. Dev had hated the Ancam at first, but had quickly mastered the tiny device that combined a walkie-talkie and camera. It was how they received directions and clues from the race organizers. It was also how they submitted their answers so they could move on to the next clue. "It's time," said Javier. "Get yourselves over to that boat." "You got it?" Sage asked Dev, making sure he would take charge of their communication device. Dev held up the Ancam and gave a confident grin. Sage instinctively checked for both earrings. They dove in. The chill of the water made everything feel real. The race really was on now. With powerful strokes, she made her way to the other vessel. After she climbed the ladder to the small deck, she looked back at her teammates. Dev wasn't far behind. His thick black hair was even straighter than usual. Wet against his dark skin, Russell, despite his athletic frame and busy schedule of team sports, did not appear to be a strong swimmer. His kick was sloppy, and his breathing lacked an even rhythm, but Mary was struggling even more. When she finally reached the ladder, Sage reached out and gave her a hand. Mary looked disoriented with the salt water streaming down her face. "You okay?" Sage asked. "I think so," Mary answered, immediately sitting on the bench at the side of the deck. Sage turned to the captain of the boat and her first mate. Both wore long-sleeved rash guards for sun protection, with the same sparkly blue eyes and space between their front teeth. They looked like mother and son. "Hi," Sage said. "We're part of the wildlife." "We know," answered the woman. "That's why we're here. I'm Gail, and this is Cole." "We've got our next clue," Dev announced, holding up the NCAM. "I'll read it. 2 will start by flying high to get a prime view from the sky. Search, and it will be no fluke when your team sights a true fluke." Yuck. "They need to get new writers," Dev declared. "You can't rhyme a word with the same word." "But they have different meanings," Mary insisted. "It doesn't matter. It's horrendous and embarrassing." "Who cares?" Sage called out, throwing up her arms. "We've got the clues." Sage turned back to Gail. "Is this a parasail boat?" she asked, eyeing the gear near the boat's stern. "Sure is. I need 2 volunteers." "Dev, you should come up with me," Sage said, as she grabbed a pair of binoculars. Then she paused, and she added, "You're the one with the ANCAM." Dev looked at Mary and Russell, then stepped into place next to Sage. There was a blur of buckles and snaps and straps as they put on life jackets and harnesses. "Mary, any advice?" Sage asked. "Well," Mary began, "there are fish called flukes, but I don't think any live around here or are big enough to see from way up there." Mary squinted as she looked into the sky. "So you must be looking for a whale fluke. 2 flukes make up a whale's tail. You can see them when humpback whales breach. That's when they throw themselves out of the water. It's really beautiful." Sage nodded. Maybe she should have chosen Mary to parasail with her, but Dev was the techie. She knew he'd get the best shot. "Now is a good time to see humpbacks," Mary continued. "They've just migrated. Even in winter, the Great Barrier Reef is warmer than the Arctic." With breakneck speed, Gail and Cole latched Sage into place on the small gondola. It reminded Sage of a ski lift. Dev paused, several steps away. His eyes seemed to be darting around, focusing on one thing and then another. At last, he came forward so Gail and Cole could strap him in too. With the pull of a lever, Gail released the parachute, which billowed behind the boat. The sail lifted and took Sage and Dev with it. Sage felt her stomach lurch. "What were you looking at back there?" she asked. "I was trying to figure out if this thing was safe," Dev yelled over the swirling wind. "My dad would freak out if he could see me." "Why?" "He's an engineer. He is very concerned with the way things work." Sage had been so set on the race that she hadn't even paused to think about safety. With all that had happened in the last year, she was surprised she hadn't considered it, but her focus was always on the finish line. "Remember, we're looking for whales," she said, concentrating on things she could control. "Breaching whales, so that we can see a fluke." Sage took in the full view. They were now hundreds of feet in the air. Below them, the water was deep blue. Towards the mainland, she could see the reef. The water there was shallow and appeared much brighter. She could see how it was many reefs hugging the coast. They looked like turquoise jewels from up high, strung together like an expensive necklace. It was hard to believe that something so big was alive, and that the animals that made up the reef were tiny. It's amazing up here, Sage yelled. The wind plastered loose strands of her hair across her face. Yeah, Dev agreed. I wish Russell and Mary could see it. Yeah, he said. Check it out, Dev demanded, pointing at the Ancam. They added a telephoto lens. They kind of had to. We could never get a decent shot without it. Mary had told them that she had read in the folder about how there was a buffer zone for whale watching. No boat could get within 100 yards of a whale for safety reasons. Dev lifted the handheld device to his eye and tried to focus in on something below. Hey, look, he said excitedly. What? Sage asked hopefully. Russell's driving the boat. I thought you were worried about safety, Sage said. They don't let him do anything very drastic, Dev answered. But just as he said it, the gondola took a dip. Whoa, Sage yelled. It felt like all her organs had jumped into her throat. What was that? Dev scanned the watered surface. They must have spotted something. Read Great Reef Games to find out what happens next. And that's the end of the book, guys. Kind of disappointing that we don't get a real ending to see who won, but I can guess. Can you guess? Who do you think is going to win? Which team? All right. See you later.